Everyone. Thank you so much to the organizing committee and the organizers for inviting me. In addition to just the ability to come back to Vienna, because I was one of those people that was here in 2004 for the Censors Conference. It was a fantastic journey through history as I prepared my remarks and got to relive so many fun moments that I've had with this community over the past close to 30 years. I'm dating myself a little bit. But so since it's the 25th anniversary of the Censors Council, I decided that I would, take a little step back in history and try to put a lot of this work into context. For those of you now who are working on censors now, for all you students in the room, I hope to end, now I'm in 2018 I became a dean, and so I feel compelled to try and give advice to people and help people. That's what my role now has gone from research professor and PI and mentor to a bringer together of people and trying to get people good working environments, good funding, and to have fun and to have experienced a career that like I experienced. So I'm a MEMS person through and through. I've been doing MEMS since I began graduate school almost 30 years ago. And as many of you know, MEMS has begun, the older I get, the harder it is to say that 1959 seems like 50 years ago, not like 70 years ago, 65 years ago. So it's the time goes by quickly, but there's been so many developments since the early pressure sensors of the 60s, surface micromachining, high aspect ratio micromachining. That was new when I was in grad school. The Bosch process came out when I was in graduate school. And then the computing power increases in the wireless technology and the AI developments that have really enabled our technologies to move forward and to actually become mainstream a lot more quickly and do things that I think those of us who have been in this game a long time could not even think were possible then. So I did a little bit of data mining for this conference. I looked back to 25 years ago, 1998, and I looked up the authors of JMEMS. I know those of you in MEMS, JMEMS is a journal in MEMS. And I looked up the authors, and first of all, there weren't very many papers. But you can look at these, and you can see that these folks are giants in the field of MEMS. But the other interesting thing I did was I went to IEEE Explore, and I data mined all the papers that mentioned sensors. And as you can tell, that has grown immediately. The numbers are small here, but this has gone from something on the order of 1,000 papers per year in 1998 to over 12,000 now. So although the conference has about the same number of submissions, the amount of people that are working in the field and using sensor technology has exploded. And I think that's a testament to the things I mentioned before, but also the testament of the research that we have done, will do, and are celebrating this week. So I'm really excited to hear what you're all working on. And I think that one of the things that the sensors community figured out a long time ago is that you have to be interdisciplinary. Right? The whole field of MEMS anyway, which is of course a kind of a subset of this community, but in MEMS, none of this would be possible if people hadn't seen the benefit of working together and seen the benefit of getting in the same room and saying, oh wow, how can I use that manufacturing technology that was being used for chips and make mechanical things. And oh, maybe I don't know how to make mechanical things, so I need to make mechanical things in a more efficient and more reliable way. So let's talk to mechanics people. Let's talk to applied physics about materials, and let's look at how these materials behave. And the only reason that this works is because we're all doing it together and we go into it with an open mind. And as I've moved on in my career from student to professor to dean, I realize more and more this is really unique. There are a lot of universities, a lot of academic departments which are still very siloed. And so I think you should count yourselves lucky to be in a community and to be enabling these breakthroughs, which otherwise would not really work. So a couple of things I was thinking about, what made this work? And then the way this presentation will go is I'm going to tell you a little bit about, try to frame the nonlinear work that I spent my technical career doing. Talk about a little bit of what I think are important things that are going on in that nonlinear community and give you a little bit of history there. And then tell you about some other applications that may be newer to everyone. And like I said, I can't help myself. I have to try and, encourage and tell people what I wish I had known when I started my career. So to go back to the sensor revolution, what really enabled the sensor revolution? So manufacturability, I already mentioned. People started making things with IC circuit technology, and it was really interesting, and there were a lot of cool demonstrations, which led to a lot of products later. But the Bosch process and the ability to easily make high aspect ratio, robust mechanical structures that could last millions of cycles really enabled this technology to go forward, and the fact that we were already integrating. Everything was integrated. Even if it wasn't made using the same chip, you could integrate it, you could put the chips together, integration and packaging and device design were all being talked about together, and that really helped us. And the fact that the Bosch process was able to be commercialized and not held by Bosch, right? The ability to get this out. There were multiple people making deep RIE machines using the Bosch process. People were evolving the Bosch process. And this really enabled us as a community to build things that then were manufacturable. And I think sometimes in today's industry, IP is such a big deal that the idea that Bosch let this one out into the wild really helped us as a community. And so I don't think that can be forgotten about. And then, like I said, the collaboration between mechanicians and designers on the mechanical side and the electrical side came together. And then there's many of us who were kind of in the second generation of MEMS folks that learned a little bit of both. I had to learn those electrical engineering classes even though I was a mechanical engineer. And it did serve me. And the other thing I really want to point out is there is a strong and important interplay between science and engineering that goes both ways. And this has also really helped us as a community to be able to contribute. So there's science and there's engineering, and you can debate what things are in what category. But the science is the discovery, right? The discovery, the learning things we didn't know before. Engineering is problem solving. It's how do you get from A to B? It's how do you do X? But in the middle, there's a whole bunch of things that matter to us both that are, if they are forgotten about, these things don't go anywhere. Systems, like I said, the integration, the systems, how does it all fit together? Modeling, how do you, that's important on both sides, both a hypothesis modeling as well as a solution modeling. Innovation and creativity, and I'll come back to this in the end. Innovation and creativity, I'm most familiar with the American educational system. I'm a product of the American educational system, and I think that at least in America, we do a really bad job of innovation and creativity. We teach people how to do stuff. We teach people how to regurgitate stuff. We teach people how to derive stuff. What we don't teach is how to go beyond, how to think of the next thing, how to fail. Right? I read an article last week that the average grade in Harvard is now in the A range, right? If we're giving grades in the A range, where's the feedback? How are we teaching people how to learn, how to fail, how to try? What we're teaching people is that failure is not an option. And we all know that that does not get you from A to B, okay? So remember that. Remember that the next time your experiment does not work, that you're trying something, right? And to loop this together, as engineers, we build things in this, that can then enable more science, right? Imaging technology, AFM development, a lot of that stuff was engineers, but then those tools could then be used by the scientists to do more and more, right? 2-photon microscopy. I was talking to a colleague at Tulane who runs the Tulane Brain Institute, and he's a neuroscientist, and he told me that 2-photon microscopy changed their game. That's engineering development that came out of science. So we need both of these pieces. So I'm just actually curious how many people that would call themselves, whose education is science, could raise your hand? All right, maybe 25%. And how many people is engineering? All right, so we're definitely dominated by engineering here, but I urge you to seek out those scientists while you're here, right? I'm married to a scientist, so we get both pieces all the time, and there'll be more on that later. So I'll just talk about a couple of the early things, just because sometimes it actually helps to go back. And that's why I'm so grateful to the organizers for inviting me today, because I got to go back in time and revisit all these things over the last 25 years. And sometimes if you go back, you see something new. My PhD advisor, the late Noel MacDonald, taught me to go back. He had a beautiful library of old books, and he would pull out an old book from like the 20s with these fancy mechanical mechanisms that people were working on, and they were deriving everything by hand, and it was very tedious. But the mechanisms that they were working on are very useful, right? They had some clever mechanisms that traditional manufacturing just went on by because there were other ways to make things. But in MEMS, there weren't other ways to make things. So actually going back to some of that old work was very relevant. So that's really, so sometimes it's a good exercise to go back, both to reflect on how far we've come, but also there's some nuggets in there that maybe weren't as important at the time, but are now very relevant. So I asked a few people in preparation for this talk what they thought some of the most important breakthroughs were, and one of my colleagues and friends, Luc Frichette, actually pointed Dr. Kurtz out, and he, and of course pressure sensors, you can't be a MEMS person and not reflect on pressure sensors, because they were really the first MEMS, and they're still everywhere. But this is, I think, kind of where it all began, and there's a lot of elements that are in a lot of MEMS devices these days. Also, I wanted to mention the MEMS micro engine. There's probably people in this room who worked on the MEMS micro engine. Are there? There's at least a couple. So again, we don't have little tiny turbine engines running around now. However, we trained, this technology was so sophisticated that people who worked on this project could do almost anything. The fabrication technology moved so far forward thanks to people who worked on the micro-engine project, which went on for quite some time. Lots of fancy wafer stacking, fancy fabrication, fancy materials, really interesting. And then there's the projects that worked and changed society. The idea that cameras and phones became something that we carry around every day and we can't live without is a testament to the sensor world, right? And these are sensors, these are many sensors, not just MEMS sensors that enabled this, but MEMS sensors are a big part of what enabled this. And accelerometers, gyros, all of these things that were originally developed, in many cases funded by DARPA for defense applications, became things that are consumer products, right? Before this, there were the video game controllers. There was a build-up to this. But I still remember I got an iPhone on the very first day iPhones came out, and I just thought it was the neatest thing, even though the battery didn't last that long and it had plenty of issues. It was amazing, and as everyone has one today. Another area where MEMS are huge are in automotive MEMS. The automotive MEMS valuation currently is about $4 billion, and it's projected to be about $14 billion in 2033. MEMS in automobiles are ubiquitous, right? And this is mostly pressure sensors, inertial sensors, and microphones in every application you can think of, right? Right, we all can just connect, our phones are connected, they can charge while we're driving, we are prevented. I had a sensor fail on a wheel of my car earlier this year. Those wheel sensors for ABS, which are of course MEMS that are doing rotation sensing and inertial sensing, one of those failed and the ABS was coming on every time I turned the wheel. Really annoying, right? So you know what will happen when the sensors fail, and they're everywhere, and they work pretty well, right? That car was old, and I live in New Orleans right now, where if you've been there, you know that New Orleans is not built on actual ground; it's built on sediment from the Mississippi, so the roads are terrible, and so it's not that surprising that a sensor would fail. I'm not blaming MEMS for that failure, And so that's an introduction, just to show you, I mean, we've come a long way, and sensors are everywhere, but it didn't happen, it happened because of an interesting confluence of events, where scientists, engineers, and people from multiple disciplines came together to solve these problems. And that's unique. In my own group in graduate school, I was the only one working on nonlinearity. In my office, I had an applied physicist, an applied chemist, a computer scientist, and 2 electrical engineers, right? And some of them are still doing MEMS, and some of them aren't. But now I want to switch a little bit to nonlinearity, which is where I spent a lot of my career, and to just talk to you a little bit about how this why nonlinearity matters and why I've been able to do it for so long. So early on in MEMS, nonlinearity was a thing to be avoided, right? Everyone was trying to build dynamic range and build amplitude, but at the same time, heaven forbid you go in the nonlinear range, because then everything would mess up. You would lose your, once you lose linearity, all of your sensor, all your algorithms, all your computing had to be more complicated. And back then there wasn't as much ability as there is to deal with that. And so that's why nonlinearity turns out to be more relevant today. But we were really in a quest to use what we could manufacture and improve the dynamic range and improve the signal-to-noise ratio of the devices. And people were running right up to the linear thresholds, but we had to understand where those nonlinear thresholds were. So initially, I was studying nonlinearity so that we understood where we couldn't operate. I was working on AFM arrays at the time because we thought that was the big thing in data storage. Well, it wasn't. There goes failure. Flash memory turns out to be a much better idea. But I was working on that at the time, and we only wanted to understand nonlinearity so that we could know where to avoid. However, there were people out there using nonlinearity for some really interesting things, including this work from IBM back in 1991 on noise reduction and noise squeezing using parametric amplification, which was one of the things that I saw when I was doing my work in nonlinearity and trying to figure out what was going on in these devices. There was also an office mate of mine who was studying nonlinearity in accelerometers at the time as well. And there was also this work on nanometer manufacturing as well. And when you scale things smaller and smaller and they get pretty stiff, you also care about nonlinearity in the nanoscale devices as well. So we were really trying to understand where these nonlinearities came from and how to manage them. So in the beginning for me, it really was about discovery. It was as I was trying to figure out what was going on, what nonlinear processes were happening in this little AFM cantilever I was working on, it was really fun seeing the math come to life. And I felt like I was sitting right on the boundary between science and engineering, because it was so cool to write down an equation and have this beautiful device which was sealed in a vacuum, and we could control it so well. You could build devices and write down a model and it would work. And in a lot of systems in mechanical engineering, you can't do that. So it really was fun, and it actually has been 25 years. That was another thing I figured out. It was 25 years since I've published the first paper, my Nature paper on this system that I was studying in graduate school. And so this is the device. This was the little tip. Again, it was fancy manufacturing. So I think we have to respect the fact that, 25 years ago, it was a wild west in manufacturing. It was like, what can we make, and how could it possibly be useful? And so it was big arrays of these. And I was studying actually the Z drive, so the movement of the tip in and out of the plane. And it was an electrostatic drive that was a nonlinear drive by design, because we were trying to figure out how to get that third dimension. And so I spent a lot of time in a clean room. Wouldn't recommend it. But I spent a lot of time characterizing this device and sitting there recording SEM video, right? Because the characterization tools, I see one of the sponsors of this is Polytech. The characterization tools didn't exist. I was sitting in the dark on an SEM videotaping a screen. Again, wouldn't recommend it. Thank goodness none of you have to do it. But it was really fun because I was measuring these amplitudes, and I would turn a little knob and turn the amplitude of the signal I was driving the MEMS with. It was electrostatic drive. And I could get to a point where it would turn on. And then I would keep turning the amplitude up, and it would turn off. And it wasn't going through resonance. It wasn't like a nice, easy off. It was a on and off. It was a very sharp boundary. And I actually found a digitization of one of those waveforms from the oscilloscope. And I'm going to play it for you today so you can see it. This is a frequency sweep. This is a sweep across this line marked C. And you'll be able to see it turn on and turn off. And it really pops on immediately. And then it pops off just as immediately. And so this turns out to be very easily explained by math. It's a parametric resonance, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's the easiest example is how a child builds up amplitude on a swing, right? Kids inherently know when they lean down, you're making the pendulum longer. You lean down, and then you sit up in the middle, and your pendulum gets shorter. And if you keep doing that, you can actually destabilize and build the oscillation. So it's sort of like that. And so by changing the length of the pendulum at the right cycle, you can build these oscillations up. And so we were building this up. And so one of the cool things was it was still a sharp transition regardless of what damping level you are, because it depends on damping in a different way than a traditional resonance. And so we studied this. We studied this to death. We mapped it out, and that was the subject of that Nature paper. But we started thinking about what could we do with this? Could we use that fact that we have that sharp transition and use that for a sensor, right? That's sensing. You love sharp transitions. And this paper came out in 1995 about the Mathieu equation, which is the a equation that describes parametrically resonant systems. And they were talking about different applications. It turns out that today, most of this work is being applied to optics. It works very well in optics, right? And you can very nice uses of this. But we were trying it then. We were like, well, we want to use it to sense something. So what can we sense? So at the time, I was collaborating with someone from the Army Research Lab, and they were trying to sense explosives in air. And so they had some precursors to TNT. Of course, you can't have explosives in a research lab, but we used a precursor, which had a similar sequence, and we did some surface chemistry to coat the devices, and we tried sensing with this. And it worked pretty well. And we were able to sense changes in frequency in air with very high degree of sensitivity, which is pretty cool, because in air, a regular resonant system would be pretty damped out, and you don't get a very high signal to noise ratio. But when you're sensing a transition like that, it was pretty cool. And then we did it, but because it was a nonlinear system. Nonlinear systems, if you aren't a nonlinear person, one of the things with nonlinear systems is that the initial conditions matter, right? You don't get the same behavior if you come from anywhere. So we had to develop some kind of tedious algorithms for detecting them, which meant sweeping, doing these fast little sweep loops. And it turns out the speed at which you do things also matters in nonlinear systems. And so that led me and a collaborator of mine, Steve Shaw. Steve and I met when he gave a talk at UC Santa Barbara, where I was a professor for many years. And Steve and I started looking at noise and how the measurement mattered, and how noise mattered, and how there were ideal measurement speeds for different noise levels. And so that was cool. We figured out some neat stuff on that had applications, both the system we were working on as well as others. And if anyone's interested in these, I'm happy to talk about them in more detail later. I wanted to make this a more general presentation. But in some cases, one of the cool things that that we figured out in this one is that there was an optimal noise. Low noise was not always better, because low noise could make the system make the response rate of the jump up in the bifurcation point behave differently. And so that was kind of neat, right? Sometimes noise actually helps you and there's an optimal rate for each system. So that was pretty cool. And so then we use that technique to measure, to do these mass detections, and we got pretty sensitive in this case. We could measure parts per trillion of these DNT precursors. And so the takeaway of this part is that I didn't do all this work by myself. My collaborators from the Army Research Lab, my collaborators at Santa Barbara, my collaborator Steve Shaw at Michigan State, who was a theoretical mechanician. These people all, the working together was a common theme and allowed us to do neat things. And because we were each interested in something different, and we were each energized by something different, and that enabled us to go bigger. And then me, my collaborators, many people around the world did a lot of things with nonlinear mechanics. We built filters, kind of clever filter. There are better ways to build filters, but we built filters. We built, we tried to do this with coupled oscillators. We made a gyroscope that was easier to tune. We made a frequency divider, which I'll show you a little video of. I always thought that was a clever, fun idea one of my students had. And we did a lot of oscillator work and phase noise. There was a big DARPA program in the 2010s on that. And again, the common theme in all the most fun work that I did was the collaborations, the learning from people. This one I did not work on. Some friends of mine worked on. But this one I like to show because it's a use of nonlinearity that we learned from interacting as a community of people that were all trying to solve this problem. And this group took a different material system to do something quite clever and build low phase noise oscillators. This is work at HRL Labs that they cleared for me to show today. This was quartz MEMS, and even though you might imagine quartz not being very nonlinear, they were able to drive this quartz MEMS into a nonlinear regime and really get a phase noise reduction that was pretty significant, again, using a nonlinear phenomenon. This is the frequency divider. Again, the reason you do a frequency divider is to try to we were trying to mechanically drive a system into, mechanically drive a mode frequency shift and allow us to lower the phase noise mechanically. And so I'll show you a little movie about how this works. You drive the first beam, and that pendulum shift, right? Think about the pendulum shift on a swing. You push the end, you're essentially changing the length of the beam, and you can drive these other frequencies. And so one of my students has thought that she could build this device, and notice it takes a little while to build up the frequency, but you can mechanically frequency divide the system. So if you do this, you should get a phase noise reduction versus a linear drive, and it turns out you do. This picture in the top is when you drive the two of them electrically, and when you just drive the frequency directly, versus driving it parametrically. And as you can see, parametrically, you get the mode 3 moves down to the level of the mode 2 phase noise. So that was kind of interesting, fun. There were other people doing parametrically excited things. This is work from Cornell in an optical disc. This is some internal resonance. This is from a fellow named Daniel Lopez at Argonne National Lab. And again, Daniel Lopez started thinking about MEMS when Steve Shaw convinced him to come to a Hilton Head conference, and then he started working on this area and had some very nice results over the years about, again, phase noise and frequency stabilization. This one also was, again, putting this in a feedback loop and building an oscillator. Again, a really nice low noise oscillator result. And then this work from Tom Kenny's group at Stanford was on the nonlinearity of bulk silicon, right? Doped silicon. They realized that if you change the doping, you could change the behavior of the device and really, again, use the nonlinearity as a design knob. And then this one was a collaboration between two of my friends, Tom and Steve, who again met at conferences, right? And they used the ring down to characterize the oscillators, which I thought was really, really fun because early in my career I had a paper, I don't actually remember where it was a conference paper, on the ring up and being able to tell which nonlinear process was dominating by the ring up phenomenon. And so then they were using the ring downs for characterization of the nonlinearities in a really clever and detailed way. So I'm not going to go over a lot of the examples, but I do think nonlinearity is something that can still be used as an extra design knob. You know, we need to think about it in a way that we can use it. And we're, with the sophistication in computing and control, we can really use this as a design knob, and so it doesn't have to be avoided anymore. And I think you'll see that in many devices, including commercial devices. So I'm going to blow through these because I did want to just point out that other people are continuing to do this work. This is probably a bit dated now, but Ashwin Seshia kept this parametric resonance work going on. And I always thought this paper was fun because it was 28 orders of parametric resonance. And back in 1998, I thought 5 was amazing. And they were able to build a much more sophisticated experiment and see a lot more than I could see back then. And then there's also other nonlinear work, like internal resonance, right? You only get internal resonance when you have a nonlinear process going on. And so there's some interesting work still out there doing some pretty fundamental things that I think can translate into the broader community. So one extension I have to say, my work in nonlinearity actually allowed me to meet my husband, John, who actually was he was running a MEMS company at the time, and he actually came to my office to ask me about a nonlinear phenomenon. And that led to of me being a lot happier overall. So that's my favorite thing that came out of nonlinearity. In addition, there's, and the two of us after that actually did some interesting work using nonlinearity, including a co-development of a MEMS switch, which recently we learned is still in high-level production of that company now. So that MEMS switch was the thing I invented that's the most ubiquitous, even though it was as a consultant to his company. And then we also, then I shifted gears a little bit here. John and I was a consultant to his company, and he was working on cell sorting. And he wanted to he had been doing cell sorting in a very complicated way, high throughput, many parallel channel cell sorting, and it never really worked very well because there were a lot of, if you're doing parallel channels and you get a clog, it kind of renders your whole system useless. And so we invented an all-wet cell sorter where the entire thing was bulk micro-machined and was a single channel, but more robust. And I'm going to show you if it works. I'm going to show you a little movie that shows how it works. And then, there we go.
From above, input, positive, and negative selection. At the bottom of the cartridge is the heart of the Taito sorting system, a microchip, which contains the world's fastest valve. Cells flow into the chip in a microchannel and are interrogated by 3 lasers. The fluorescent and scattered light signatures are used to determine which cells are to be sorted. To sort, magnetic field is applied to the chip, which actuates the valve, and a single crystal silicon spring returns the valve home after each sort. The acceleration of the valve is over 50,000 Gs in each direction, allowing for precise sorting even at high cell concentrations. The Max Quant Taito, sorting cells quickly, safely, without aerosols, without cross-contamination, and without damaging cells.
So this is interesting. You can see the valve.
This is the new.
Oops, sorry. I'm going to move
This is the
on. There we go. So interestingly, that valve was a lot of nonlinear design as well, including nonlinear fluid mechanics, which made the modeling really, it was a stretch for me. Because it had been a long time since I did fluid mechanics. But the nonlinear the interaction between the mechanical valve and the spring design and the fluid mechanics there's actually a lot of subtleties there, and there was a lot of design iterations as we worked through all the nonlinear processes going on at one time. So that one was really interesting. And that product today is called Taito. That company was acquired by Miltenyi Biotech back in 2013, and that I just learned that I think they shipped their a millionth microchip in those cartridges last year. So that is a cool thing that included fluorescent sensing, tagging of materials, MEMS, a MEMS valve, microfluidics. Integration with optical systems, and they actually used some early deep learning algorithms in their cell detection. So again, a very interdisciplinary thing that took a lot of people and a lot of exciting innovation together. And I took away from that, because of that collaboration, one of the things that they were worried about and that doctors were worried about in sorting cells were what happens to the cells when they get thrust through these microchannels? Are they going to get damaged? Will they be different? And so I used that to move on and modify that cell sorter into a hammer. so that we could really stress individual cells and study what happened to them. And so as you can see, this chip looks just like the sorter chip. This was a collaboration with Owl Biomedical, the company that made the sorting, and UCSB, where I was at the time, and we built a hammer out of that. And so you can see in this video, you can see the hammer now instead of a valve, it just can squash things, right? And so we built a few iterations of this so that it could grab a cell and squash it to varying degrees, and then we were studying that. And then later on, I partnered with a neuroscientist, and we started learning about the genetic differences of cells. We started squashing neural cells, stem cells that were precursors to various neural cells, and to see what happens when these cells get squashed in a very repeatable way. And one of the interesting things you can do with these systems, I mean, you could squash a cell on a one-off basis, but the thing is biology is really complicated. For all of you out here who think that MEMS systems are complicated, biology is like a million times more complicated. Things do not do the same thing. If you could put 50,000 cells through this thing in an hour, and you would get a bunch of different results. Because even though we say, oh, this is a neural stem cell, it's this, there are a lot of subtle differences that we don't understand yet, and biologists don't understand yet. And so these are really complicated systems. But the idea that you can do the same mechanical thing to 50,000 of them is a MEMS problem, right? So this is, again, some really fun extension of that work. And I think there's a lot of potential for the sensor and the MEMS community to interact with the biology community, because this is the next big frontier, understanding these very complex systems. The other cool thing that's happening now that we cannot ignore is the AI development. And I actually borrowed this slide from a colleague of mine at Tulane who studies AI. And as you look at AI, early AI development was really kind of bumpy. But, you know, the AI people now tell me that the time frame for changes in AI algorithms is on a kind of weak time scale. So the world is changing. What we can do with these systems is changing. And AI is good at a lot of things. And AI, what you might think of as AI, has changed also, and how people interpret it. So what we're talking about now with things like GPT-4 and things like that are actually things that are that enable the computer is learning itself, and it's not just doing a formula, right? Early computing, you just have a flow chart, and the computer can do what you can do. It can do it faster if you program it, but it does what you program. Whereas the deep learning algorithms are much more sophisticated and very good at certain things. They're also very not good at certain things. They make mistakes. My friend in AI tells this story of an algorithm that was supposed to tell if a picture was a wolf or a dog. And it could do it in most cases, but there was a couple of cases where it got it really wrong. And so then they dug in and reverse engineered the problem to see what was the computer looking at when it decided wolf or dog. And it turned out that the computer, almost all the pictures of wolves were in the snow. And almost all the pictures of dogs were not in the snow. And so it was looking at the background of the picture. It wasn't looking at the animal at all. And it was saying, oh, it's in the snow, it must be a wolf. And that's because the algorithm, you know, the algorithm worked itself and made that errant conclusion. So we do have to, you know, we can't just use these things blindly, but they can really help. And for example, in the cell sorting, you can actually tell if two cells are stuck to each other. That's the kind of image analysis that deep learning is very good at, better in some cases than humans. So there's a lot to do there. So I would say keep apprised, right? We owe it to ourselves. So now in conclusion, next few minutes, I really want to tell you kind of things that I wish that I could go back and tell my 25-year-old self, because sadly that was 25 years ago, because I'm getting old. Embrace creativity when it's scary. And this goes back to what I said earlier about the average grade being an A. Like, think about what you can do. Think about the crazy stuff. Think outside the box. Ask people from other fields what they want, right? That cell sorting didn't come out of me and John talking about, oh, I think we can make a cell sorter. That was from him many years ago, talking to one of his mentors, who was a respected doctor at Stanford, and him saying, what would change the world? And this guy, this cancer oncologist said, you know, cell sorting would change immunotherapy, right? You have to talk to the experts. What do they want, right? We're tool builders. So branch out, learn something new. There's 9 parallel sessions at this conference. Go to the session that's least like what you do. Learn something new. Think outside the box. We actually at Tulane now involve a lot of undergraduates in research, and we actually use it as a recruiting tool to funnel undergraduates directly into research labs. And it's one of my favorite programs because these students get to join as a freshman on their first day and have a lab to go to. And they might not know anything, but they bring a perspective of anything is possible. And they add a unique energy, and every professor that has one of these students in their labs tells me it's the best thing they did, okay? Think outside the box, learn something new, and listen to the people who don't have the cynicism that you have from sitting in a clean room like I did for years, right? I know what I think is and isn't possible. People who haven't done that don't, and that adds the energy, the creativity, the anything is possible. And then again, I've already spent a lot of time talking about this. Really respect and explore the interplay between disciplines. What can you do now that we have GPT-4? What can you do now that we have much faster computing? How can we use those things to make our performance of our systems better? How can we partner with industry to do interesting and exciting things? How can we shouldn't let things stop us that we don't know, okay? And I think this community has a leg up on that because of the fact that we came from interdisciplinarity. And so pulling this all together, like I said, adopt a growth mindset. Go to a session where you don't know, where it looks like a foreign language, the titles of the talks. You may come away with something you didn't think. And you may get a new idea that will really change what you're working on and change your direction, and that could be really fun. And ask a lot of questions. I used to challenge my students to ask questions in every time they went to a talk. Ask a question. First of all, it makes you pay attention, right? You have to ask a question. But it also enables you to think about what's going on. And then, do risky things, because you never know where they may lead. We have a lot of challenges facing the world, and I'm not going to go in a doom and gloom direction, but I do want to point out we have a lot of challenges facing the world. Water quality, water availability, healthcare. Do things that have an impact on society. How can just think about it over the week, how can what you're working on now impact some of the grand challenges facing the world today? Because we all have to care about this stuff. It is not going to solve itself. And it's my opinion that there will be some real engineering challenges needed. So reflect on what you're doing and how it can help society and help some of the global challenges facing us, because it's incredibly important. And our future and our children's future and our grandchildren's future depends on it. So with that, I will conclude. I want to acknowledge lots of people, and I used a font that no one can read because in case I forgot someone, you know. This is the case where I have been, had the pleasure of working with so many people throughout my career, and they've all had a profound impact, and every person impacts you. And now that I'm a dean and I consider myself an enabler, right? I just want to enable people to do their best work. I want to enable people to have fun. I want to enable people to change the world and make it better. And so I couldn't have done any of that if it weren't for all of these people, and probably another page of people that I could have included. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure, and I really look forward to meeting many of you. And at this time, I believe there's a little bit of time for questions, so I'd be happy to take questions.